Alright, as a little bonus video here, I've decided to include a little walkthrough that's showing the comp that was used to create the image that's on the DVD cover. It's not very big, it's a fairly simple little comp here, and let's take a look at how it was set up. First of all, I'll start here. This is the background, just plugged in background with output resolution. Made it black, and it's also 16-bit float because I want to make sure that everything that I do after this point along the main line of the comp is handled in 16-bit float. We'll take a look at the background here. This is just a photograph I took on vacation in Hawaii a few years ago, and what I've done to it is this I'm also kind of promoting to 16-bit float so that anything I do afterwards will be handled in the same way. So here I've raised the gain on it. I just, when it was over the foreground stuff, I wanted it to look a little bit more blown out, so I just pumped the gain up a tiny bit. We'll come back and look at this section here in a minute. Let's go over here. This part of it is the CG part of the shot, and this was rendered out of V-Ray. You might recognize this sort of setup. I'll take a look here. This is the diffuse pass. Here is the GI, and here's the sunlight, just the key light. And I also have these different matte passes where I've put, like, the palm trees have 100% green, the little plants here have 100% blue, and the vine leaves are red. And then I also have this one where I've got the little sort of flower pots. The ground, I thought I might want to change the ground a little bit. And this is sort of the branches of the ivy, I guess you'd call it, in the green channel. So what I did was, after the diffuse, I decided I wanted the little branches, or I guess that's what you'd call it, of the ivy to be a little bit brighter. And so what I did was I put a brightness contrast, I pumped the gamma up a little bit, and I'm using the green channel of this matte pass as my mask. Alright, so that got pumped up a little bit, and then I've done a few things over here as well. The raw GI, I actually just took that down a tiny bit. I brought the gain down, and I just felt that when it was all put together that the ambient light in the scene was a little too bright, and I wanted it to be a bit more contrasty. So I just took it down a little bit, and then what I did is, with the brightness contrast, I brought the gain up on just the leaves of the ivy. So I'm using the red channel of this pass as a mask for this brightness contrast, just pumping it up a little bit. And then I did the exact same thing using the green channel to pump up the gain of the palm trees in the back. I just felt they weren't bright enough. Now, you might recognize this little setup here. This is unpre-multiplying the render so that we restore those edges, so that when I perform the multiplication here, that I don't screw up the edges. So that's all this is doing. For the GI as well, it's unpre-multiplying, and down here the raw light, same thing, unpre-multiplying. So here is the GI, which is being multiplied with the diffuse. Just like before with the other V-Ray stuff, it needs to be seen with the lookup tables set to 2.2 in order for it to display correctly. So here's what that should actually look like. And here is the diffuse pass multiplied with the key light. Then merged together, we're adding these. So alpha gain down, and it's set to additive. Then we take the matte control node here and we post multiply the image. So we're pre-multiplying the image again. Then I have the reflections in the scene and the speculars. Now for the reflections, I'm actually not doing anything. These are just being added over it, and I'm not doing any color corrections to it. So there's that added on. For the speculars, I did do a little bit of an adjustment. What I ended up doing was brightening just the specular hits on the palm tree leaves back here. So I created an ellipse mask here and just made sure it was around the section and just brighten that up a tiny bit. Alright, so then after that it gets pumped into this gamma node. Now once we get to here, we don't need the lookup table anymore. Here's what the shot looks like so far. Now we'll get into this whole little section here. What I'm doing with all of these nodes is I'm doing what's called a light wrap, and it's basically taking some of the background image and letting it bleed over the edges of the foreground. So here's the result of that if I look at this matte control. So before and after. And let's break down what's happening inside here. So after the gamut, we go into this channel boolean and I'm unpre-multiplying the image again. So I'm dividing by the alpha for the RGB, and the alpha channel itself is not changing at all. Then if we come over here, you'll see I've got the background, which I'm branching off and I'm blurring, and then I'm merging the two together. Now this needs to be controlled by a mask, so let me take this guy out of here for a second, and I'll recreate the steps I did here so you can see what's happening. So channel boolean unpre-multiplies, then I'm additively merging the blurred background on top, and what we'll do is we'll add a bitmap mask to this, and I'm going to pump the original images alpha in there to control everything. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to invert this, okay, and then we're going to soften the edge. So we're basically, if we take a look at the mask itself, alright, here is the alpha channel inverted basically, and then we're blurring it. And I don't know why the display is acting like that, but you can still see what's happening. So we're blurring that edge, and then we're adding that back on top of everything, and as a final step we're just post multiplying again. So we basically just took some of that background color, brought it over top of the edges a little bit, and then punched back through the alpha. So before, after, and I'm actually going to plug this original one back in because I like the settings I had for that. Alright, so after that, what I did was I brought the contrast up just a little bit, but I did it everywhere except in this corner. So I drew just a polygon mask around this section here, gave it a soft fall off, and then if you notice over here it gets a little bit more contrasty, and then the image goes over top of the background. Now I'll show you the difference with and without that light wrap. Okay, so you see how it just kind of brings some of that color back over top of everything, and it just really helps integrate the foreground and the background together. Alright, so then we're getting down to the very end of the flow here. The the soft glow. It's a very, very subtle thing. In fact, let me zoom way in here. Basically, all I'm doing is I'm putting a very, very faint soft glow on this image, but I'm only doing it to the blue channel. And what that does is, like the sky back here is basically blue. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that some of that color kind of bleeds around the edges here. It's kind of like a blue fringe that you would get in a photograph, or like chromatic aberration. But it's just a very, very subtle little thing, and it just kind of tints some of these areas a little bit with blue. And I just felt that that really helped integrate it and take it a little bit closer to being photoreal. Then what I did is I added a little vignette. So I've got this elliptical mask again, where I've softened the edge, inverted it so that it's only affecting the outer corners, and then I'm dropping the gain and the gamma a little bit. And I find that if you just drop the gain, it kind of looks a little strange. It can tend to flatten things out a little bit. So I also like to bring the gamma down a touch. I bring them down kind of together, and I think it just looks a little nicer that way. Alright, and then the final thing I'm going to do here is I'm changing the depth of the image again back to 16-bit. I've basically done everything I want to do to the image, but I want to drop it back to 16-bit a little bit. I'm basically clamping all the highlights now. And I'm not using grain here, but the whole reason that I normally do this is because I do use grain. So let's add some grain to this. Now let me see if I can find some grain. Here we go. Yeah, let me show you what happens here. So I'll pump this in, and I'm gonna really sort of exaggerate it just so you can see. Okay, super grainy now. Don't ever use this much grain. This is too much. But anyways, everything behaves kind of right. If I did not clamp the image beforehand, watch what happens. Ah, lovely. You don't really see it here. Normally, what I would get is some really strange sort of pixels that just freak out in the overbright areas, and I usually get all kinds of different color, like super blue pixels and super red pixels and green pixels, and just pure insanity wherever there is overbright areas. Now, why it's not happening on this computer, I'm not entirely sure, but at work that happens to me all the time. So I think it's just probably a good idea, even though I'm not really seeing the problem so much here, to put it through a change depth node and bring it back to 16-bit. Alright, so I don't want to put any grain on this image, and this is really where the final image came from. So that's basically it. It's a fairly simple comp, nothing too crazy going on here, but that is how everything was set up for this final image.